Hello, everybody. All right. For those I've not met, my name is David Finkel. I want to welcome everybody here. We're doing a special session tonight. How you doing, Don, Clayton? Who are my local folks besides Don and Clayton, besides Michelle? Okay, so it's Mike. Okay, you guys do the garbage disposal of some sort, right? That's cool. I love it. I love it. And who else is here local? I'm trying to think who else is local. Like within it, Phil's local. You're an hour and a half, 3 days, depending on traffic. Who else is local here in Atlanta? I'm just out of curiosity. Okay, the rest of us think that you guys got spoiled with that part of it, right? What a beautiful day it was. My wife, I was telling to 3 or 4 different people, they're out camping right now in Montana, and they had snowstorms, and I'm just like, wow, can you imagine that? June snowstorms? Now, Russell, in your world, you can imagine it. They do outdoor activities with that and guiding services. But tonight we're doing something special. So what we're doing here is we realize that for a lot of the events that we do, people come to the event and they get straight into the content of that domain that we're doing. So for example, tomorrow and on Sunday we'll be on the financial pillar of the company. And so they think, leaving thinking what Maui does is it teaches us about the financial pillar. Or if I could fast forward to September, what Maui teaches about the best practices for really hiring and onboarding great talent. Or if I went backwards 3 months in systems and controls, it's systems and controls. So what we're using tonight for is about 75 minutes or so, an hour and 15 minutes, hour and 20 minutes, to give kind of more of that bigger picture of an approach to scaling a company. And doing it in such a way, knowing that a good portion of you here are the business owner, and a good portion of you in here are the key leaders within someone else's business. Wonderful. We'll approach it both ways. And so when you leave, you have a good framework, and then for those who want to come, we're hoping you will. We're just going to go hang out by the bar and relax and just enjoy each other's company before we get started. It's our way of getting a running start for the weekend. So tomorrow morning, in case I forget to say it later, we'll start right on time. You're all registered for it. You're all checked in because you're here. But in case you don't remember, we'll start right on time at 8:30 tomorrow morning. Come 10, 15 minutes early, you'll be fine. It'll be in the same room, although it'll be much bigger because we'll be having about two and a quarter times as many people. But thank you for making the effort. If this works out well and you like it, tell us and we might continue doing it. If it turned out to be not exactly what you need, let us know that too, because it's a lot of extra work and we want to see if it really adds value to your life. So if you would right now, check cell phones, wrist devices, anything else that goes tick or tweet or whatever it might be, and just turn to vibrate or silent if you wouldn't mind. We'd really appreciate that. All right. That said, I think I've taken over all the housekeeping, and is there anything I'm not remembering, Steve, about that? Are we good with that? Okay. So welcome tonight, and I want to start off by sharing a quick story. So I remember it was 20 years ago. It was 1999, and I was 29 years old. And it was right in about the 4 years into building my very first company. And I remember I was sitting outside, it was in the evening time, and I was having a mild panic attack. Any of you ever had a panic attack? I had never experienced one. I didn't know what it was. I was sitting in a hot tub in this beautiful home I bought, the first time in about a year that I'd ever actually been in the hot tub since I purchased the home. Because at that point in time, all I did in my life was work. I was still single. I worked probably 70, 80, 90 hours a week. I was on the road 2.5 weeks every month, teaching workshops, keynoting at different conferences. I felt like, is this all my life is going to be? It's going to be meetings and customer fires and staff issues and email and email and email and email. It was overwhelming. I had all the markers of success in the business. The company was growing 20, 30% a year. I was earning more money than I ever thought I ever would. At 29 years old, I was earning more money than my parents, my dad as a doctor, had ever earned. But I was thinking to myself, if this keeps up, I'm never going to have a family. Who would even want to marry me, let alone how could we have kids? We wouldn't even have time to do any of that to have kids, because all I did was work, and when I wasn't working, I was exhausted. Does that sound vaguely familiar to anybody at one point in your lives? I know I'm talking to a group of high-earning, high-achieving business owners and entrepreneurs and key executives and so forth. I get it. See if this sounds familiar. Like you wake up in the morning, and one of the first things you do as your head lifts from the pillow is turn over to your table next to your bed and pick up your phone. And on your phone, you check your email or app feeds or whatever it is. Come clean. Who does that in the morning time, right? Before you even get up to do anything else. Or you're at your kid's sporting event, or your son or daughter's got a performance, and you're there, and surreptitiously you're doing what? You're looking down and checking your your phone for messages or things you need to respond to. Or you're in the office and you feel like you're pulled in 1,000 different directions. See if you've ever experienced that. I get it. So what I want to share with you tonight is a way that you can get out from that trap. Because truly, as you think about this here, you're feeling stressed, you're feeling pulled in 1,000 directions, overwhelmed. How many of you have a to-do list that literally could never be done? Right? It's like this bottomless pit. And we're running, and at the same time, there's no way we're going to get that all done. And you're not alone. Besides here and your peers in this room, you look at studies. Harvard Business Review had a study reported on from the Center for Creative Leadership. Executives, business owners, entrepreneurs, professionals in 37 different countries. The average work week, 72 hours they reported. 72 hours. That's the average. Which means that for every one business owner or executive that's working a light 55-hour week, someone else is working 95 hours to offset that. Crazy. Think about that. Gallup, Wells Fargo created a small business index. They did a poll. 50% of small business owners in the U.S., 6 days a week working. 20%, 1 out of 5. 7 days a week. 7 days a week. How many of you have been there before with that part? So how do you deal with that? TripAdvisor did a survey. Of the employees who were eligible for getting paid vacation, half, 50%, didn't take all the vacation they were eligible for in the U.S. Even in the developed world, Germany and other countries in Europe or South America that are developed nations, 30% of people who get paid time off don't take it all. All the demands we have on ourselves, all the places we're pulled in 1,000 different directions, the stress or anxiety, what happens if I lose one of my key people and all of her responsibilities fall back onto my shoulders? This is what we're dealing with. This is what we're dealing with. And so it's almost as if we've been forced to make a choice in this world. Either we choose to be successful in the business place, in our career, our profession, or our company, or we have a life. And it's like this either or choice. How many of you have ever felt torn between those two poles in your life? But that's a false decision, because when you really look at it, those people who are most successful, the business owners, the executives, what they've been able to do is they've been able to break that one-to-one relationship of 1 hour worked, 1 hour of value created, so that we can have 1 hour of work creating 100 or 1,000 units of value. And that's what I want to talk with you about this evening. How can you have 1 unit of input create 100 or 1,000 units of output with that? And not just you, how can you roll that out as a way of building your company? So that not only do you say that I can have my business success, my career success, and still have a family, a healthy individual life, all those fulfilling elements that really lead to a rich personal life that goes so much beyond just the bottom line. And that's the theme for this evening as we go through it here. And I guess I have a confession to make. I have all kinds of wonderful research, but I'm not an academic. I'm not a researcher. I'm just a business person. And what I'm sharing with you is not something that was created in a classroom. It was created out of a real harsh reality of doing it in the world of business. It started off, I had that moment I shared with you in the business world where I was having that panic attack myself, thinking, here I'm at 29 and all I do is work. I can't go on. I'm burning out. And for about 3 or 4 months, I didn't know what to do with that. I had a business partner and he was working just as hard as I was, maybe even harder because he had kids. At that time, I was still single, didn't have any children. And we were talking together and we were at a meeting in Estes Park, Colorado. This is actually the time we were there. And I was shocked when he turned to me and said, and independently he'd come to the same conclusion. He said, David, I'm not having any fun anymore. I don't want to keep doing it this way. Something's got to change. And I said, Peter, I'm so glad you said that because I felt the same way. At first I was thinking maybe I would let him down by doing something different. You see those yellow sheets of paper that we're working on right there? Well, on one of them we drew this poster. And in this poster we had a part here, I'll just kind of bring it up here. It says, how long, what a great question, how long can we leave the business and have it be worth the same or more? This was in 2001, the first time, probably in 2000 or 2001, the first time we'd ever really looked at our business and thought about the business's health as, could we step away for a period of time, even for a vacation, and have the business continue to produce as well or better? It's a different way of looking at a company. Now, I know for those of you here that have been following our work for a long time, it seems obvious. Of course, We want to grow the company, grow its revenue, grow its bottom line, operating profit. Of course we do. And we want to grow its strategic depth so it's independent of any one person. Of course we want to do that. But back then, that was not something anyone ever taught us about. And so now we had the experiment of how do you do this? So what I'm going to share with you tonight started out of desperation. It was Peter and I trying to figure out how to do this in our own company. It started off with he and I learning different things and applying them specifically inside of our company to see what would happen if we ran our company under this principle, that we don't get paid for time served, instead we get paid for value created. What would happen if we ran our company that way? And we watched our company flourish. Company doubled, and then doubled again, and then doubled a third time, and at that point I ended up selling my half interest in the company based on this premise. And at the same time the company doubled and doubled again and doubled again over that 4.5-year period of time. At that same time that was happening, Peter and I were going from working 80, 90-hour work weeks to working 45 or 50 hours, which was a big improvement. And at that time we were each taking off 12 weeks of vacation per year toward the end of that part. So we were working less and the company was doing better and better. And we thought, well, if this is working for us, how can we start sharing this with different coaching clients? And so what I'll share with you is I do work in a laboratory, but it's not in a college. It's not in a university setting. It's not in a private lab. It's in what I think is the harshest condition of all, the marketplace. And so and at this point now, it's not just, originally it was a few hundred clients, but over the years we've worked and shared these ideas with 5, 10, 15, 20,000 different business leaders. And what we found over time is the things that we thought made the difference, we've been able to narrow and shorten and reduce. So what we're left with is the core into a simple 4-step formula. Now the 4 steps aren't about just doing the 4 steps. These are the things to get you started on this path, and that's what I want to be sharing with you tonight. I'm going to be going through those 4 steps because truly what we want for you is to have a life too. As we started sharing these ideas, it was pretty amazing what the feedback was from the marketplace. You know, we've all heard, right? We've all heard, I'm not supposed to work just hard. I'm supposed to work what? Smart. Don't just work hard, work smart. But what's not obvious is what does it actually mean to work smarter? And so if you look at over the years, the thing that I think I've become well known for is not to be the person to just tell you what to do, but the person who's going to give you the concrete how to do the what to do's. Some people call it because I'm anal retentive. Others think I'm very process orientated. Both are probably accurate depending on the day or night. When you ask somebody, they're going to say one or the other. We'll call it process oriented. So I'm going to give you the concrete steps to get the result. And as we do that here, I just want to remind you that what our goal here is to give you the core for how do you operationalize working smarter. It's one thing to say, oh, work smarter, but yeah, how do you do that in the face of all the other demands? I can almost hear the sub-conversation going on in a few heads, right? David, sure, work smarter, I've heard that before, that makes sense, but if you knew all the demands that come to me every day, if you saw how many times I'm interrupted throughout the workday, if you knew how many email messages I get each day, or how many WhatsApp alerts I get, or on Slack I'm constantly talking here back and forth, or whatever the tool is you use, or if you understood about all the customer fires that I'm having to put out every single day, not to mention about my vendors, my suppliers, and don't even get me started on my staff with different things that are going on. So how do you operationalize working smarter in the face of all that? And that's what we're going to be getting into. All right. So it starts with a premise. And here's the premise. The premise is we don't get paid for time served, we get paid for value created. Now we need time to create value, but we don't need time as a general, like this raw, undifferentiated time. What we really need is a specific type of time. We need blocks of uninterrupted best time. Blocks of our best attention going for a period of time. We don't need a day. We might need an hour or 3 hours, and I'll go into how do you reclaim that back. And then we need to make sure that we invest our best time and attention on those fewer areas that make a bigger difference. And we'll get into how to do that here. Again, I recognize it's easy to say to do that, but how do you do it in the face of all the other demands that are competing in your workday? So I thought I knew how to do about time. This is actually my youngest, the birth of Adam and Matthew, my 2 older sons. And I remember holding them for the first time in the hospital. Now, prior to that, for about 10 years, I'd been building companies and it had been working exceptionally well. But when push came to shove, if I needed to get on a plane to go keynote at a conference because I had a great opportunity, or I had a deadline with my publisher and I needed to put in 2 or 3 months to finish up a book, I would just, nose to the grindstone, everyone ever heard the expression, and I would just put the hours in. But when I held my 2 sons in the hospital, that just wasn't an option anymore. And I approached it differently. Have you ever thought about like an astronaut? When he or she, like one of the people that's come to one of our events, she's an astronaut. She did a couple of shuttle missions. And so when you're an astronaut, you have certain consumables of oxygen, of water, of food and fuel that when you're in space, you can't just like pull over and fill up the tank. I mean, what you have is what you have. And so I started thinking, well, what if I were to run my company where I'm going to put a hard stop at 40 hours a week? What if I'm going to make sure that I maintain a minimum of 10 hours or more every year of real vacation time? And so from that place, knowing that I'm not going to bring work home, knowing when push comes to shove, family gets the nod, how does that change? And so for the past 10 years, we've been refining the formula. You guys have been a lot of the experimental group for how to do that. And what I'm going to share with you is the core steps. That's what I want to get to right now. And I think I'll start off with this idea that there are 2 economies in the world. The first economy, we call this the time and effort economy. And in the time and effort economy, you get paid for hours, effort, and attitude. In the time and effort economy, how many hours you put in, how much effort you put in, or at least appear to put in, and what kind of attitude. Are you smiling or are you grumbling? That's what's going to be how you get paid. But there's another economy that works kind of in the shadows. We call that the value economy. And in the value economy, you don't get paid for what you work, you get paid for what you actually accomplish. You're getting paid for the value you're creating economically in the market. Now, neither model is true or false, but which is more useful? So in the time and effort economy, we say things like, my boss will be upset if she sees that I'm not busy. Keep busy. Always have the appearance as people are watching. In the value economy, someone says, you know what, my boss is going to be really upset with me if she sees that I'm not getting results. It's a very different way with that. In the time and effort economy, my boss will be upset if I don't keep checking my inbox, if I'm not responsive, if he or she sends me a message and I don't get back to them right away. In the value economy, my boss is going to be upset with me if she sees that I'm interrupting my best work by doing low-value tasks and not creating the results that I'm actually on the payroll to do. It's a very different approach, right? In the time and effort economy, it says work hard, put in the hours. In the value economy, it says get results, right? Focus on what matters more. If the time and effort economy were like this big blockbuster movie, it would be like Rocky, like the original Rocky, right? It would be, and the poster child would be Rocky Balboa, right? Bloodied and bruised, and you think, well, that's not so bad, right? I guess I can put in the hours. I mean, after all, he became heavyweight champion of the world. To which I say, well, number one, that was a Hollywood movie, a fairy tale for adults. And number two, there must be a better way to create the results that you want than just absorbing year after year after year of punishing hours. There must be a better way. So the first thing I'm going to ask that you do, the first step, is to ask yourself and make the decision, which economy are you going to live in? Now, ultimately, we're all in one or the other, but which are you going to live in? And I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, David, it's really hard to focus on the things that matter most when I'm living in a time and effort world, when I'm drowning in all these to-dos that I have. I get it. I'll give with you some ideas of how you can clear space during blocks during the week. But the first decision you have to make is which economy you're going to live in. And living in it means not what you're going to say, because everyone says, oh, I'll be in the value economy. Everyone says that. What do we have to watch to see what economy you're really in? Your behaviors. We see by your behavior which you're in. Now, if you're a leader and you have people who work for you, which economy do you push them to live in? So have you ever had the experience, I'll ask the team members in here, have you ever had the experience where you're working on a really important project that your boss or your manager interrupted for something that was less valuable, but you live in a company where it's not, I won't ask you to raise your hands, you live in a company where it's not okay to challenge that and say, look, this is more valuable for me to finish what you've got here. This creates much more economic value for the company than what you're asking right now. In most companies, you can never have that conversation. Why? Because of the hierarchical nature of that part. Because most companies give lip service to say we're in the value economy, but they don't live it. How do you promote people? How do you hire people? Is it, wow, she's always so responsive, she's right on email, or she always gets back to me quickly? Well, hang on. If your best person is in a conference room, designing, for example, how to solve an engineering challenge, working with your programming team, for example, they might have 2 hours of focus of how they're going to approach that, solve that problem, that directs hundreds of hours of later programming time. And you're going to interrupt that because you have a quick question? We have to ask ourselves, how are we behaving? Are we behaving in the value economy? Or are we behaving in the time and effort economy? And if you want another way to think about it, imagine I was following you with a clipboard. I know I said I wasn't an academic, but I've always wanted a clipboard. I've never had a job where I've had a clipboard, and I really want one. So if you don't know what you get me for the holidays, get me a clipboard. And I would follow you around. And if I were to follow you around, noting your behavior, what would your behavior show which economy you're living in? Now, you don't have to be all one, all the other, because let's face it, how many of you live in both worlds sometimes, depending on the time? All of us do. The key is we want our best time to be in the value economy. How many of you are my morning people? You're sharpest earlier in the day. Okay, that's about 80% of you. Who are my night owls at your best at midnight, right? Like you just, your thoughts come clean. The key is whenever you're at your best, you want to be in the value economy at that time. You want to be doing your most valuable work when you're sharpest. Why? Because why would we want to fritter our best time and attention on low-value junk? We want to invest it on those things, on upgraded uses. So the first step of the formula is to make the decision to live, to behave in the value economy, especially during our very best time. No one's going to live in the value economy every single moment of the workday. Every one of us is going to have a guilty pleasure to escape into the lull of doing something as enjoyable as responding to a low-value email or doing something else that's more of a tension relief. But if our best time of the day or evening is spent in that value economy, it makes all the difference in the world. So that's the first step. Second step for us there is going to be for us to be looking at reclaiming back some of our best time, our best attention. Let's do that now. So what I want to think about here is, how can I take some of the hours I'm already working and pull them back from low-value uses and invest them in my very best and highest? And how do I do that in the face of interruptions, other people's urgent demands, and just the chaos of what the average workday is? How many of you get more than 50 emails a day? How many of you get more than 100 per day if you add in all kinds of app messages and feed notifications and all that, right? How do you do that, right? How do we do that? We need to create blocks where we shut out the world to do our high-value activities. Sometimes our high-value activities will be with other people. Sometimes it'll be purely by ourselves. But there's a distinction, and I'm going to go through that with you here right now. So as we think about it, most people say, oh, if you want to create more, produce more, work harder. But the harder you work, which is that time and effort economy, the more your business becomes reliant on you, dependent upon you, addicted to you to produce that result. If you're managing a team, how many of you have ever found it's easier sometimes to step in and give an answer? It's easier sometimes to step in and do the step that they're getting stuck at versus coaching them through it. Who's ever found that that's easier? And it is the first time. And it is even the second time. But by the time you get to the third time and the fourth time and the 76th time, we know it's a failing way. We need to help grow them to be able to produce that result. We know we need to do that, but it's hard in the face of all the demands because it takes a little bit of extra energy to guide them through that. Plus, how many of you have ever had this, it's a medical condition. There's a new organ that they discovered recently. It's called the control gland. And for many business leaders, it gets inflamed. We call this controlitis. Who's ever suffered from an acute case of controlitis? And the more we control, the more we grip tightly, the more we're locked into that time and effort trap. So learning how to pry our fingers off of that makes all the difference in the world. So knowing that that's a piece of it, how can we reclaim some of our best time? And I'll give a quick example. So this is Keith and Shirley. Shirley on the right-hand side. So Shirley and Keith run several different, very successful high-end preschools in Southern California. Some of us have actually visited with their preschools. Now, this is not the preschool with 20 kids. This is the preschool in a beautifully furnished building, Montessori-style schools that might have 150 200 kids that are coming through their schools every day. These are some beautiful multi-million-dollar facilities that they've done. And when we first met Shirley, she was working a 100-hour work week, 100 hours. And when we ask, how do you balance that? Well, you're a mom, you've got 2 daughters. How do you balance that? And of course, her answer was balance that? Balance? She was living in which economy? For sure, she was living in the time and effort economy. A lot of her day was spent doing things that she wasn't willing at that point in time to let go of, or she didn't have the mechanic skill sets to manage to let go of to other people. Now, the nice part about it is today she's got a sane work schedule. She's probably down to a livable 60, 65 hours per week, which in her world is huge. She basically shed a full-time job. At the same time, she's opened up a 3rd school. They're financially doing better than they ever were. They're helping now. I think they're up to close to probably 500 or so, 600 kids that they're responsible for every day. I mean, it's a pretty remarkable thing that they've done. So I understand that the thing that pulls you into as a leader, not just as a doer, but as a leader, that thing that roots you into that time and effort economy is that inflammation of the control gland. You have to be really careful about that. And that's 2 things. One, it's the willingness to let go. And then number 2, it's a skill set of how to intelligently let go. I'm not saying you should just dump and run. I'm not just saying you should abdicate. But slowly, how do you grow your people, your systems, and your culture of your company? We'll talk about that later tonight, so that they can take on incrementally a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. But it all starts with that decision to do so. So what is it that you do that creates the most value? What is it that you do that really is the special part of what you do every day? We call this a time value matrix. And the time value matrix basically says, let's take that 80-20 rule, that Pareto's principle, and let's take it to its most productive extreme. So we start off here. How many of you have ever heard the 80-20 rule? I'm assuming it's probably most everyone here. And what it says in the 80-20 rule is that, hey, 80% of what you do gives you very little value, gives you 20% of your result. We call this D time, or low value time. This is the junk email that you're answering. This is maybe it's going through and sorting physical mail that comes in. Maybe it's scanning a document. Maybe it's running the equivalent of an errand inside of your business. It's something that you do that creates very little economic value, yet it takes up such a large proportion of your time. On the flip side, 20% of what we do, we call this C time, this leveraged C time, creates 80% of the result. And if you look at D time versus C time, we say that, 4 times less work creates 4 times more result. So that means for every 1 hour of C time, you're getting 16 times more value than an hour of D time. Now, I don't believe these proportions are exact. I think that's more of a magnitude or more of a kind of a trend. I don't think it's any precise thing. But let's apply this again. If 20% of what I do gives me 80% of the return, what does 20% of the 20% give me? It gives me 80% of the 80%. And if I do the math for you, it says 4% in, the sweet spot 4%, we call it B time, gives you 64% of your result. Every 1 hour of a B activity is worth 64 times, not percent, 64 times an hour of a D activity. And this makes sense. Calling up a key customer is clearly a lot more valuable than answering a junk email or taking a phone call that you really don't want to talk to the person and there's no value to it. So if 20% of the 20% gives you 80% of the 80%, bear with me for one more math moment. I'll do the math for you. And we say that 20% of that 20% of the 20% gives me 80% of the 80% of the 80%. And I'll do all the math for you. Essentially, it's saying that magic 1% gives you half the result. Technically, it's 0.8%, but we're going to leave it at the 1% just to keep our math easier again, because I don't think it's an exact science. And this magic 1%, let's do it as an example. So we have a client who, when I first met, his name was Tom Santilli. Some of you have met Tom before. A really nice guy. They do an online reseller of used electronic equipment like Dell servers or Cisco servers. They sell kind of more of a higher end commercial grade computer equipment that's been used in the secondary market. They're one of the largest resellers of Dell equipment in the country. And when I first met Tom, and he looked at this, he realized there were only 3 things that he did that created value for his company. Everything else he did either was minimal value or in many cases was actually hurting his company. So what he did was he bought right. He would buy a large grouping of used equipment at the right price, The second thing he did was he priced it properly so it would sell with a healthy margin. And the third thing was when there was a big picture strategic decision in the company, should I hire or not hire? Should I buy this building or not buy this building? He would make those decisions. Everything else created very little value. Yet when he looked at his day, almost exclusively what he did every day was spend it on email, or he would be down on the warehouse floor getting in the way of the guys who were actually testing the different equipment before they shipped it out. Now, he was, quote unquote, very successful. The company was doing $5 million a year, $1 million a year of profit, but he was working 80 hours per week. It was hurting his health, hurting his children. His wife, Lee, was actually the one who paid for the workshop, for him to join us for a workshop. I thought it was very funny because Tom is, if you've ever met Tom, he's a very frugal person. So the only reason he actually came to that first workshop in 2007, it was in Phoenix, or maybe it was 2006, was because his wife paid for it and was non-refundable. That's the only reason. He'll be the first to tell you. Of course, I'll share with you later on tonight the after of that part of it, but what is it that you do that creates the most value? Pause for a moment and ask yourself. I don't know if you're not sure if it's A or B, it doesn't matter at this moment in time. That distinction will come clear. But jot down, if you would, for a moment, what are one or two of your highest value activities? For example, for my company, Maui Mastermind, giving a keynote to a large group of people is one of our B-level activities. Writing a new book is both an A or B level part. Writing the title of the books, doing the promotion for the book is A time for my company. Actually writing the book is probably more B time for me. What about editing that book? Is that like grammar and usage? Is that really A or B use of my time? It's not. The publisher can have a much better person doing heavy lifting on the grammar and usage. Certainly making sure it's a great book, A and B uses of time. What are your A and B? Just jot down a few because I want you really thinking about it. The D stuff is obvious. The D stuff is the junky stuff that creates very little value, and we know that, but what's the A and B stuff? Now, recognizing that that's what we want to do, how do we create blocks of time to do that? And this is where a concept called focus days and push days come into play. So a focus day is a 1 day a week that you're going to block off an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours. You're going to give yourself a real block of uninterrupted best time. Uninterrupted best time at the time of the day that you're really at your best. A push day is every other day of the week. You're just pushing projects, you're pushing activities one more step further down the road. And during your focus day, you're going to actually block that off to make sure you have a 2, 3, or even a 4-hour block of time. And then on every push day, you want to give yourself 1 hour of interrupted best time. So this is an example of what it might look like. You might have on Tuesday your focus day, and so from 8:30 to 11:30, this person's fictitiously blocked off a 3-hour block of time. And during this 3 hours, what are they going to do? They're going to do 1 or 2 things that really matter for the company, and exclusively they'll be what level of activity? A or B level activity. A or B level activity, not your C level stuff. So I'll give an example why this comes into play so much. We were working with a law firm. It doesn't matter where they're from. We'll say they're from Atlanta since we're here in Atlanta for this evening. And the senior partner we were working with said, well, I bill at $600 an hour. I can't afford the time to take it to do an hour of coaching. I can't afford the time and energy in that part. David, the highest value use of my time is a billable hour. I said, isn't that interesting? So about 3 months into it, we started approaching some easy places to make a difference in a professional practice. A professional service firm, if you were a coach for a professional service firms, there's 3 places that you could look at that will make you look so smart and make them think, wow, you're a genius. But it's just so easy. Number 1 is pricing. Notorious. Most professional service firms don't price very well. Now, they might price well for the main producer, the expert, in this case, the attorney, but what he didn't price well was his paralegal and secretarial staff. He was able to raise pricing an average of about $40 to $50 per hour across the board, and considering he's got roughly 20 paralegals and or legal secretaries there, that was one place where he probably made $500,000 of extra profit in 1 year. That's recurring because it happens the next year just on pricing. Another place, collections. Professional service firms are notorious being slow on actually doing invoicing and collections, and that really hurts them is that they end up writing off 5, 10, 15% of the receivables. Now, if they're operating on a 30% profit margin, writing off 10% of your receivables, wow, that's a major hit to income with that part. You can essentially go up by 1/3 of extra profit simply by collecting that money that you were entitled to. The third place, if I'm looking with the professional service firms that I'll do, and it's so easy, which is they outpace their capacity. In other words, they have so much work coming in that they can no longer actually keep up with the work, and capacity becomes the challenge. And usually that's an efficiency aspect because hiring great professional level staff is difficult to do. And the easiest place is to give them more capacity, not by hiring more professionals, not by, in this case, hiring more attorneys, but by looking at the system and the administrative staff to support increasing the capacity, which gives them effectively more professionals. Because most of your professional staff will be doing work that really is administrative or more of a service type of work, not actually producing the professional service. And so when we do that better, and in this case they were able to do that, they were able to probably increase it about 25% their production efficiency for their legal service. Did those three things, it turned out that first year, he made over $850,000 extra profit, not gross, but profit. And yet still there are times this particular client still says, I'm too busy to do the coach part. Why? Because I'm giving up the $600 an hour that he could be billing for it. And he gets it. It's a reptilian response. It's that back vestigial part of his brain. So when you're in that work, if you think who in this room bills hourly for your work, or someone in your company bills hourly, I want to tell you, I can almost guarantee you that for you as running the company, the hourly billable work is probably C time for you. It's certainly not A time, and it's probably not B time either. I know it feels like it should be because you're getting paid directly for it, but for example, the work that brings more work in the door would be more valuable from that part. So anyways, going back to this, having blocks of best time make all the difference in the world. And all we're really changing, you see all this white space up there? Like, how many of you have ever been to Las Vegas? Who are my Vegas folks out here? Raise your hands, be proud. Now, Charlie does it because of poker. I liked doing it before I had kids because I really liked buffets. Anyone else like buffets? Now, you have to walk far between for buffets in Vegas now. It's just only one block down the road, and about 7 miles, right? So you go there and you go like to the Rio, and they have this incredible buffet. There's a great strategy for doing buffets well. The most important plate of food in a buffet to be healthy is which plate of food? It's the first plate of food. If your first plate of food has vegetables and other nutritious food, you fill up part of your stomach, you get nutrition, and you don't have enough room to eat as much junk. Then you can go hit the pastry part. Then you can go hit all the pastas and all that other stuff. But if your first plate of food is really nutritious, you're going to eat less of the unhealthy stuff. So by blocking off your focus day and an hour on each of your push days first, all we're changing is 4 hours, 6 hours, or 8 hours over the entire work week. You still have all that other white space to put everything else, but if we put our best hours first, blocked off for us to do A and B level stuff, it's the equivalent at that buffet of saying we're not going to fill our day, our work day, with empty calories. That first plate is where everything kind of meets together. That's where you create the most value. It's a very different way. Where do most people give their best activities? What part of the day do they give to their A and B level activities in general out there in the workplace? Those people in the time and effort economy. They give their remnant time, the leftover time. Essentially what they say is if I'm still hungry after 3 plates of food at the buffet of all the junk and crap, then I'll go ahead and go back and have maybe a pea or a piece of cauliflower or a cut of lean meat, right? Instead, we're going to say we're going to have that first plate. We're going to put in the most nutritious work activities, the highest value work activities first, and then we'll let the rest of the time do what it wants to. And what this is a nod to is I get that in the face of all the other demands that you've got going on, it's difficult to change your entire behavior. All I'm asking for you to do is the equivalent of change the first plate of food. And then you can do the rest of the buffet of your work week any way that you want to. How many of you can change the first plate and just change 4 hours or 6 hours out of a whole work week, right? That's doable. I'm not asking too much. You will get more value in that extra 4 hours that you change and upgrade than probably the other 40, 50, 60 hours put together. And I think you'll discover that. How many of you know that if you put 6 hours into your highest paid activity, that you would progress your business, your company in a way that working all that low value stuff for an extra year would never produce the same result as doing that consistently every single week, 50 weeks out of the year, 35 weeks out of the year, depending how much vacation you take or whatever. So that's the first piece. This is what my day looks like on my week. Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday are my focus days. So for me, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I give myself a 3.5-hour block of time. Then I start jonesing for my email, and I go in there and check. And I do a few calls, and I need to return and check my WhatsApp feed to see what's going on inside the team. And then I come back for another hour, hour and a half in the early afternoon. By that point, I'm pretty much brain dead anyways. So on Tuesday and Thursday in the afternoon, I'll take some lower value or some easier meetings that I can do in those afternoons. And then on Fridays, I'll do the same thing, except for, generally speaking, I like to get out of the office a little bit earlier on Friday so I can go spend time with my family. That's me. And I'll tell you, what we've done here is I've shifted around 15, 16 hours a week. Those 15 hours of focus time are probably worth about 100 times more than the other hours in terms of what economically they do for the company. Not 100%, but probably 100 times if I was doing the other activities, the things that just push things down the road a little bit at a time. So the first step was to make the decision that you're going to live, you're going to behave in the value economy. And we said it's not about what you say, it's about what you do. We don't get paid for time served, we get paid for value created. The second step says I need to create time by reclaiming some of my best hours, and I gave you some specific ideas how to do that, to invest in my A and B level activities. Now that we've done that for us as an individual, how do we get other people in our company doing the same thing? How do we start to transition so it's not just one person in your company, you, living in the value economy, but how do you get your key staff living in the value economy? How many of you can recognize that when you can compound the best time and attention of your staff members, that you're going to succeed even faster, right? And it's going to also make it healthier for your company because it's not you doing everything. It's not you doing everything for your team. It's you're really growing your staff's capability to be part of that. So the next step says, how do we figure out what the activities, the places in our company that are the A and B level places in our company for the company to focus on? Step 2 said, how do I reclaim some of my best time to focus on A and B activities for myself? Step 3 says, how do I focus my team's best energy, my team's best attention, my team's best hours on the fewer better for the company, the things that make a biggest difference? So it's not about more. I don't need you and I don't need your staff to work more time, more hours. I just need you to work different. I need you and your staff to put more of its best energy, its best attention on those things that create a bigger difference. We don't need more, we need less. But the less we do has to matter a lot more. And that's where we're heading with this part. So the first place I'll just do is a quick example. So some of you have seen this chart before. If you haven't, U.S. economy back, and it was in 2017, grew 2.3%. These are the numbers that I have for all the stats. So I just want to share a quick moment. Average privately held company that year grew an average of 7.3%. So you can already see that the average privately held company outgrew the economy. That's a good point. That same year, our average client grew by a total of 5 times faster, or 32% on average. What's the difference? The difference is focusing more of the team's best attention on those few things that make a bigger difference. Because if you could imagine, if you could focus your best time and effort on the things that matter, what would happen if you multiply that by the 5, the 55, the 555 team members that you have that are your most valuable team members of all? How can you get them to focus some of their best attention on the things that matter? And the question comes up, what are the things that matter most? What are the things that we start on that would make the biggest difference? And so I want to give you a technique to do that here. We call it finding your company's sweet spot. And so every quarter I want you to ask the question, what's the one limiting factor more than anything else that slows our company, or if you're doing this in a department or a division of your company, that slows our division down? What's the one limiting factor, the one ingredient, if I only had more of X, would automatically do the most to help the company or the department or the team to grow fastest? And I'll give an example what that might look like. So I don't know if John or Brian, are you in the room here? Sure. He's not. Okay, no worries with that. So this is John and Brian. And so they have a building company here in Atlanta. And when I remember first talking with them, meeting with them about their company had 4 distinct business lines in the world of construction. One of the business lines had to do with home remodeling. Another one had to do with outdoor living space, porches and decks. Another one had to do with siding, and another one had to do with gutters and outdoor water removal and business. And their number one limiting factor was they were spread in way too many different directions. The year prior to working together, they had grown their company by about 12%. At the same time, their profits had actually declined, even though that they were larger. Why? Because they were running around doing too many different things. So for them, the most important part was to decide which of those business lines, the service lines for their company, was most valuable. Turns out in their world, it wasn't the remodeling, and it wasn't the gutters or the siding. It was the outdoor living space. They're able in their world to get a margin that's probably 4 times greater of a profit margin than the average person in their space. Why? Because by focusing on one thing, they are the premium brand in this area for that particular type of construction project. They command a premium. The quality and customer experience is by far different than working with a competitor of theirs. So that was for them, the narrowing of that to their fewer better made a big difference. So I want you to think and jot down in front of you, what's the single biggest limiting factor in your business? The one ingredient that if you had more of X. So an example might be, gosh, if I only had more technicians or technical people to do the work, or we're growing so fast we've outgrown our capital. If only I had more capital, we would grow faster. Or maybe you say, it's really me, it's my time. If I could just reclaim out of some of my hours to focus on the next area of growth for us. Or maybe you say for you it's the marketing side. Hey, we've got extra capacity, we're just not selling enough. And why we're not selling enough is because we don't have enough leads coming in the door. Or maybe you say, hey, we've got plenty of leads coming in the door, we don't have sales capacity. We've got leads that are going stale, they're expiring because we don't have the sales staff to actually follow up on them. Pick the number one limiting factor that you have. And then what you do is you're going to brainstorm a list of all different kinds of ideas you have to push that limiting factor back. And the way I want you to think about that is, you have your limiting factor, how can you come up with as many as you can, but a minimum of 10, if not more, ideas for how to push that limiting factor back. You need at least 10, if not more. And then you're going to come back and you're going to put each of these ideas through 2 filters. And these 2 filters, which are done in 2 separate steps, are we call low-hanging fruit and home runs. Low-hanging fruit says, is this idea easy to do with a high likelihood of producing a result? If it's easy to do with a high likelihood of producing a result, you give it a little LH. It's a low-hanging fruit. As you look down these ideas, you ask, is this a low-hanging fruit? Is this a low-hanging fruit? Is this a low-hanging fruit? And anytime you see it's a low-hanging fruit, you mark it that way. Low-hanging fruit, think about what that means. If you're outside in your backyard and you have an apple tree, it's easy just to reach over and pull off that apple. Low-hanging, easy to do, high likelihood of working. It doesn't say how big the impact is, it just says it'll work and it will produce something. A home run is a different one. What we say is, if I do this idea and it works well, will it have a big impact? If it does, it's a home run. If I do this idea, is it a home run? Will it move the needle? And I ask, is it a home run? 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 And I ask it in 2 separate steps. And what I'm looking for are those things that are both low-hanging fruit and a home run. Because what those are your sweet spot. By definition, something that's low-hanging fruit and it's something that would have a big impact, that's the idea that you should run with. It's a simple way to see which ideas to do. So if you've ever wondered, hey, David, I have so many opportunities. I could go after X, I could go after Y, I could go after Z. This is a simple filter that works, and I would really encourage it as a discipline in the company to ask, which is a low-hanging fruit and which is a home run, and ideally you want both. Now what happens if you have 2 or 3 ideas that are both low-hanging fruit and home runs? You have multiple sweet spots? Consider yourself fortunate. Then tackle what you actually have the resources to do. Any of your home runs that are low-hanging fruit, so in other words, any sweet spot by definition is a great place to focus on. If you've got 3 different sweet spots and you only have the resources of attention and time and money to go after one, then do one well. If you can staff down to certain different people so that you can go after more than one at a time, then go after more than one. The key is why would we go after low-hanging fruit when we have low-hanging fruit that's also a home run? Go after the sweet spot first. It's a simple way. How many of you like the idea? I know some of you have heard me share that before. Next piece in here I want to talk about, here's an example of how this might work in the world. So I'm going to use an example of a medical practice. Oops, I guess I don't have that story here. Never mind, we'll skip it then. So we'll talk about an action plan. So now that I know what my sweet spot is for how I push back my limiting factor, the next place that I get my team to focus on those things that are fewer better, those things that make the biggest difference, is I actually give them a plan every single quarter. Now initially it's probably you thinking what that plan is. Later on, what's the best practice over time? Who should create the plan? You and your key leaders should be creating the plan. If we want our team to really buy into doing the plan, who should be engaged in cooking the meal? Your key people should. And ultimately, you want them to be able to create their plans for their sub-teams or their sub-departments or divisions in the company. But for the moment, we'll just stop and talk about the one-page plan of action. So the idea behind it is every quarter you can reduce to one page the action plan for your team. Here's the 1, 2, or 3 focus areas, the things that matter most this quarter. We're not going to have 16 focus areas. Why don't we want 16 focus areas? I mean, why not be efficient? We can get it all done. What happens if we go after 16 things at once? Any of you have a spouse who does home improvement around your home? So in our house, we laugh about it. So I don't do home improvement. My wife does home improvement. I'm probably her biggest project, and she's still working on that. But outside of that, she'll fix things in the house because she's handy about that. I'm not. So Heather will love to do that part. But if you can imagine, what happens if we start a project in the kitchen, and then a project in the bathroom, a project up in the bedroom, a project outside in the backyard? What happens to those projects? We just live in a big mess that's never done. Instead, let's pick one project and get it actually completed before we do the next. So in your action plan, we say you can have at most 3 focus areas per quarter. At most 3. Does that mean you have to have 3? No. For example, if you were to look at the company action plan for Maui this quarter, coming up here in quarter 3, we've got 2 focus areas for the company. Why? Because those 2 are so clearly more important than the rest, and there's some significant projects. One's about the release of a new book that we're coming out with in September. So these are big projects. So you don't have to have 3, but you can't go above 3 is my suggestion for you. Each focus area should have a really clear criteria of success. So for this focus area, what would have to happen? What could I watch or observe happening? What could I tangibly, concretely see was completed at the end of the quarter that would let me know I was successful in this project or in this focus area this quarter? Everyone wants to jump on the plan to all the action steps and milestones. Everyone wants to do it. Why? Because it's sexy. Oh, I'm going to do this, then I'll do that. I'll do this by then. But if you take a moment and step back and ask, what is the criteria of success first? Number 1, the action steps and milestones are obvious. And number 2, along the way, you can pause and say, are we on progress for doing the right result? We don't care about the action step and milestone for themselves. The activity doesn't matter. If I only cared about checking off to see if I did the step, what economy am I living in? The time and effort economy. If I'm living in the value economy, I care about the criteria of success. I care about accomplishing the result. So yes, I need action steps and milestones and who does what by when, but I need those because it helps me create the result. If I could create the result without any action steps, what would we all do? We would just create the result. We do need to do some of those steps, but don't be locked in because you might discover through the quarter that there's a better way to accomplish the result. Be locked into the result, but be flexible about the means to accomplish the result. Does that make sense? So every quarter, max of 3 focus areas, each with a clear criteria of success, reduced to 1 page. This is one that some of you will fight me on. David, we do this already. Matter of fact, I could show you our 7-page plan of action. And I can almost guarantee you that if I ask the next question, the answer will be a stunned pause. And the next question would be, how often do you actually look at your 7-page plan of action? Because the reality is, if it's more than 1 page, maybe you get away with 2 pages. But if it's more than 1 page, you're just not going to look at it. How frequently should you look at your company plan of action? Once a week or once every other week? Am I making progress on that? So now that I think about it, I'm reducing my company's best attention to a rolling series of 90-day action plans. And those of you who have been doing this discipline for a while, you know it probably takes anywhere from an hour to 3 or 4 hours to create a great action plan, depending how much involvement you give with and for other people. So it doesn't take a lot, but that 1 to 4 hours shapes the very best time and attention for hundreds of staff hours. In some cases, thousands of staff hours every quarter. So why wouldn't you make sense? I mean, is that an A or a B level activity? Certainly it's one or the other, right? We're clear that it's a highly leveraged activity to pause and say, how and what are we going to accomplish And what's the plan for doing that? One page. And you can share that one page. I talk to a lot of business people, and what they say is, oh, I've got my plan. I say, great. Does it work to help shape your team's behavior? And they say, well, my team doesn't know about it. And I think to myself, generally, if you're not sharing the action plan with your team, it's because of a medical condition we've talked about earlier. And what's that medical condition? Controlitis. You're scared that if you were to tell your team that you'd be giving up some form of control, in this case of information. I think it's crazy. My team should know about the action plan. What are we going after? Why? Because when they are faced with a choice between doing X and Y, and they don't have the time or the resources in their staff to do both, how can they make an intelligent choice about which to let go of and which to actually make sure gets done if they don't know the company's priorities? So every quarter I want to be doing that, every single quarter. Now once I start doing that, the next piece in here is we're going to talk about this as the Big Rock Report, but I want to share a quick story about how this works in real life. So you've got someone here, this is Tom Umbach, he runs a medical group, a surgical group. They do weight surgeries, a bariatric surgeon. And so when we first started working with Tom, it was the toughest challenge for him is he was full. He was very efficient. He probably produces most of his surgeries 2 or 3 times faster than the average bariatric surgeon. He's done thousands of these different surgeries, over the last 15, 20 years. He's got an incredibly good team that work with him in the OR, and they've been with him for years. I mean, they can read each other's minds. But even still, there's a point at which you can only do so many surgeries. And so for him, he needed to find a way to do more procedures, he thought. When we started looking at that, we started brainstorming of how to deal with that as a limiting factor. If you can only produce a certain number of procedures, say for example, we'll make up a number here. You can only do 20 procedures per week. I don't remember what the number was from, but we'll use 20 procedures. Now, what he can do, though, is be strategic about which procedures he wants to do. He might have one procedure that generates a certain amount of value economically. Let's say it generates $6,000 of profit. And he might have another procedure that generates $12,000 of value. If he's only got 20 spots per week and he's full, what should he do? He should shift some of the marketing and sales efforts. I know it seems strange to say in a medical practice you have sales and marketing efforts going on, but I'm going to burst everyone's bubble and say, of course medical practices have sales and marketing efforts going on. And shift that attention so he brings in more of these other cases. And he can look at other ways of doing that. So that was one thing he started to do that made a big difference. It generated probably an increase of revenue immediately from doing that of about 30% more revenue with the exact same fixed overhead. In other words, that 30% extra revenue had some cost of goods sold with it that he was already doing under the old ones. So that 30% increase dropped straight to the what? Straight to the bottom line. He didn't work any extra hours. Matter of fact, another solution that he had worked even better. This is him at a conference we did in Florida a couple years ago, and he's holding up his surgical schedule saying, David, I'm so excited. This is me in surgery today. And I got a little bit curious about that. I said, Tom, you're here, your practice is in Las Vegas. We're 1,500 miles away. How are you, is it like this new robotic thing, or how are you doing surgery? He's like, no. Because we were able to take care of some of the fires that we have, and we've now gotten much better about focusing our best efforts on the places that make a big difference, I actually had the time to interview and hire a second surgeon. He now has 3 surgeons that are in his practice. And how did he do that? He dealt with one limiting factor, which now exposed a new limiting factor. And then he pushed that back, which exposed another one. And over that time, over the last 4.5 years, he's able to do that. Now, here's the coolest part of all. His practice is probably 200-ish% larger. And he's actually was like 9 or 10 weeks of vacation last year, which is a big deal. He's got young kids, twins. I'm a father of twins. And who else has twins in the room here? So a number of us have twins in the room here, right? How neat is that? So while they're still young, his 2 sons, they're able to take 9 or 10 weeks of vacation. So he's creating more value in the world and he's working less, which is the epitome of the value economy, which is what I'm looking for you guys to do. So how do you make this real? How do you take your action plan, which is one page, and how do you get your team to actually execute on that action plan? So the nice thing about the action plan is it lays out every quarter what you'll do, but we still need a way to take what was on the action plan and get them into their daily doing every week. And so we call this the Big Rock Report. Some of you have been filling this out for a long time off the Maui app, but for those of you that haven't, it's a simple tool. And what we're doing is every single week at the start of the week, Or who are my people who plan on Friday for the next week? Okay. Who are my Sunday planners? You plan on Sunday for the week. And who are my Monday morning planners for the week? And those that didn't raise your hand are too busy to plan. We got a few of you in there with that part, no problem. Enjoy your time and effort economy. Enjoy it. Because without that planning piece for that. But a big rock report, you're just basically taking 10 minutes at the start of each week, and you're asking, out of all the things I could do in the coming week, I look at my action plan, I look at my to-do list, what are the 1 or 2, possibly 3 tasks or chunks of a project that if I did them this week would move the company forward the most? It would make the biggest difference, would add the most value to the company this week. And a big rock should take 2 hours or less of time. Why should it not take more than 2 hours? Because it's almost impossible for you to consistently get 2 hours of your best attention uninterrupted. You're not going to get more than that without needing to shift gears a little bit, generally, even on a focus day. So what you're doing is you're saying, for you it might be a meeting with your number one vendor to negotiate on pricing. That might be your big rock for the week if you're in operations. Or if you're in sales, it might be a meeting with your number one strategic selling partner to see how you could collectively sell more. If you're a leader of the company, it might be doing interviews with 2 people that week about an open position for a key management hire that you're making. So during your best time, you're going to do your best activities, which will be your big rock. So why do we go to the step of doing that? How many of you have a to-do list, whether it's on a computer or on a sheet of paper or in a journal? How many of you have a to-do list that goes to 7, 8, 9, 10,000 pages long, right? And so if I look at that, it's completely what? Completely overwhelming. So what I do each week is I pull off from that to-do list and from my action plan just the 1 or 2 things, sometimes 3, but the 1 or 2 things that this week, if I just did these 2 things, everything else is gravy. The 1 or 2 things that create the most value. And I make sure that those big rocks go planned in during my best focused time, and I do them first. Again, we're getting into the nitty-gritty of this idea of operationalize, working smarter. The first step of working smarter says, I don't get paid for my time, I get paid for the result. The second thing says I have to reclaim some of my best time to put it onto my highest value activities. And we've identified those A and B level activities. The third thing says I want to focus mine and my team's best time, attention, and talent on those fewer better that make a bigger difference. And we talked about the action plan and the sweet spot. Well, the big rock basically says, in a weekly basis, what this week, the 1 or 2 things this week that make the biggest difference. This is the nitty-gritty. This is where the rubber meets the road of actually doing those higher value activities. You want to live, you want to behave in the value economy, pick your big rocks for the week. Now, it's easy to let that slide. And when you do, I can almost guarantee you that you'll have a less valuable week. If you just start the week by asking, what are the 1 or 2 things this week that I could do that creates the most value, and actually have it in a structured way, and at the end of the week report on your team, how did you do on those 1 or 2 things? Again, it takes you 5 or 10 minutes. It doesn't take a lot of time. I love it. On Monday, I get a chance to read my team's big rock report, the ones that I'm responsible for managing. So I've got 6 direct reports that I still deal with every single week in Maui. And every Monday, I get a chance. Some of them do it on Friday, some do it on Monday morning, and I get a chance to see. And it takes me probably 20, 30 minutes to go through these 6 big rock reports, and I have a really clear handle about what they see as the biggest priorities. And generally speaking, because we've been doing it for several years, they're very focused for their best time on the things that make a big difference. You as a manager, by getting your team to do this as a leader, you now get to see what did Sheila think was her highest priorities this week, right? What did Caesar think was his highest priorities this week? And if they're off, it gives you an opportunity to coach and redirect. It's a simple, easy way for you to see what your team sees as the highest priorities. So if the one-page action plan was a great bridge from your big picture goals to your doing, the big rock report is a great bridge from that quarterly action plan to the day-to-day nitty-gritty doing. So there's one more step we're going to do here tonight, and I want to talk about this, which is, this is wonderful, but what do you do when everything starts getting crazy? How many of you have been in business long enough that somewhere you had someone quit, or a big customer fire, or a project that went over budget, or a supplier that went belly up and now you're scrambling because you have commitments? How many of you have had at least that happen at least 1,000 times in your business career, right? It's going to happen. We know that. And when that happens, it's really easy to let all this other stuff go. Like when the house is on fire, it's really hard to think about value economy. When the house is on fire, what's our first reaction? To jump in and start what? Working. So this final 4 steps says, how do we sustain the gains that you've made? And we do that by building strategic depth. By building the depth of our systems, our team, and our culture, it allows us to, when those things go wrong, and they will, that you can still maintain the momentum that you have and not jump back to just putting in more hours. Hours are a Band-Aid. Hours are like at the bottom of a hole you're digging. Yes, you'll go deeper and deeper, and yes, it feels like the activity is getting you what you want, but all it really does is mire and trap you into more of those rounds of work. It's not the best solution. So if you can think about it this way, every one of your team has a certain knowledge for how to do stuff. And it's almost like if their brain, anyone heard of a tabula rasa? I was a philosophy major way back when, 30 years ago in college, and they used to talk about this blank slate. So they come in, they don't know anything. And pretty soon they learn how to do everything. But everything they learn how to do is, if you can imagine, it's written on a chalkboard. And if they leave the company, if they get hurt, if their children have a certain behavior that they need to take a personal leave to go deal with, if their spouse gets relocated and he needs to move along to be at the next place of work with his wife, if an elderly relative gets sick and they need to step away from the business, what happens to that whiteboard, that blackboard? It all gets erased, gone. And so for most businesses, they don't think about this. And I'll share a story with this. There's a woman, her name is Elizabeth Caldwell. She works for a Fortune 50 consulting company. They're a company that has 700 offices, I think like 50,000 employees around the world. And she works in a division that does risk management. And in her world, she is a rock star. And she works. And she works and she works. No wimpy 72-hour weeks. She puts in over a 100-hour work week. 100 hours every week. She's been doing this now for over a decade. She is one of the only people in her office that was a negotiating point for a Fortune 50 retail business that said, if she's on our account, you'll get the business. But if she's not, we'll go to one of your competitors. Millions of dollars at stake. And what their company has done is they've let her work 100 hours a week for 10 years. They've taken what is one of the most marquee clients that they have, they put it all in the one basket saying Elizabeth Caldwell. And if Elizabeth gets hurt, burned out, or heaven forbid retires, because she's now in her early 50s and she's probably sick to death of working that many hours, what happens to that number one client account? It's at risk, it's in play. If she were recruited over to a competitor, that marquee account, which probably would lead to tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of other business going across the street as well, gone. It's insane. It's bad business. Besides the saying, I don't think it's really kind to your team members to make them do that. She's essentially working 3 full-time jobs, 2 full-time jobs with that part. What's a smarter way? Giving her some resources to have staff that she can cross-train to do what she does, to process out what she does, to mentor and groom other people to do. How many of you either currently work in a place or have worked in a place where Elizabeth is held up on a pedestal and said, we want all the rest of us to be just like that? Like what gets rewarded is that part. It's bad business. It's dumb because the moment there's an issue there, it's going to create a cascading series of emergencies that could really topple or certainly cause a major pain to the business. So I'll give another story for those of you that are entrepreneurs. Right here, this is Ann Staines and her husband Morgan. Morgan's an attorney, but Ann runs a marketing company that works with government and works with social businesses, with businesses that have a particular positive social aim, and they do marketing for it. She's brilliant. Well, about a year ago, she was riding her bike in San Francisco, actually a year and a half ago now. She was riding her bike in San Francisco with her husband and got into a biking accident. Major concussion. Thankfully, she had a helmet, which helped the top of her head, but she also struck the front of her face, and major concussion. For 4 months, she could not work. Or if she worked, she couldn't look at a screen. She had to be in a dim room. All these things that happen when you have a major concussion. She never thought about that before. What would happen to your business if Elizabeth or Ann or you had the equivalent of that biking accident? You can imagine that. So we want to prepare for that today by taking those steps to build strategic depth. So strategic depth is one part defense, to protect yourself from the loss of a key person, including you. But strategic depth is also offense. Because how do you scale if you can't replicate what people do? How do you scale if you're constrained because only a certain number of people know how to do it? The moment you can start to systematize and cross-train team, and the moment you can start to create a culture that does certain behaviors consistently well, it's easier to scale up what you do. So it's also offense. Strategic depth is defense, and it's also offense. So I'll come back to what happened in our story in a moment, but just kind of jump into here. I want to talk about the systems piece. So we call it your UBS. How do you create the collection, the system of all your systems? Now, most of you have in your companies, there's some form of software that you use. You know, it might be a construction management program that you use, or it might be a point of purchase software that you use, or it might be an ERP system, an enterprise resource program. It might be some form. Most of you have some form of software that runs a good part of your business. But what about all the systems outside of that? What about the training tools for how to use your ERP system? What about the training tools to onboard a new team member? What about the pricing list for how to go about bidding out a job? What about the templated paperwork that your sales team uses again and again? What about the marketing collateral that your marketing team uses? What about operationally the checklist to make sure that you do all the right steps? What about the scripting that you use? These are all examples for systems, and where do most of these systems live in companies that have not put concerted effort here? They live in the blackboard, on the dry erase board inside the minds of a few key employees. And the moment that employee leaves, it's gone. It's like wiping it all clear. You spent tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars helping her write it all on the board, and then when she leaves, it's all gone. Crazy. Crazy. Plus, everyone's at risk. If something happens there, it cascades to the organization. So your UBS is a way to start bringing systems thinking into the company so that you can formalize those best practices and put them into a place to store it. So think about it this way. Your UBS is a collection of your tools, and it's probably going to be cloud-based. And these tools might be Word docs, they might be PDF files, they might be spreadsheets, they might be video training tools, they might be it could be a checklist for how you have a certain thing. It might be a script. It might be pre-done documents. It might be a timeline that you already have in your project management tool. These are all examples of the systems. And if we can think about it, examples might be you have 1.0 sales marketing, 2.0 that folder is going to be all the HR function, 3.0 might be all the operations function, 4.0 might be all the finance. 5.0 might be all the executive leadership. And the idea is it gives us a home, because even if it's not just in the brains of your people, many times what you'll find is that all your systems were actually living on the hard drives locally in all these different computers, and they were never brought together in a way that one person's best stuff could be shared with another person. Everyone has their own versions of that. And by centralizing it in a way that everyone that needs to have access can have access to it, makes everyone's life better. So the first place is you create your subfolders, your 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, etc. Next, we want to pick one area to start with. So for example, we're going to pretend you have an IT services company. And we're going to pretend that you want to systematize starting with the HR function of your company. So if Mike were to come in and run the HR, he would say, okay, our 2.1 is recruiting, and our 2.2 is onboarding, 2.3 is training, 2.4 is benefits, and 2.5 might be about exiting a team member. And so we're going to then ask, if these are my subfolders, what do I already have? How do I load what I already have in there? I might have some stuff that's temporary, it's not good, but it's better than nothing. I might have some stuff that's great, and I might have other things that I should probably either delete or just archive because they're really not what I want to be using. So for example, the next time you go to onboard somebody and you have your onboarding schedule of what it might look like over the first 8 weeks of this person coming on, well, if you're going to have a second person playing that role, why would you want to recreate the wheel? Keep that in your UBS so the next time you can make version 1.0 a little bit better for version 2.0. Maybe version 2.0 comes with certain video-based messages or certain conversations that this person that's the new hire is going to have with people who are spaced out over the course of the first week to take him or her out to lunch. And maybe the next version after that even has video-based messages from the CEO of the company welcoming them there. The next version might have a little bit more help to make them be successful, to make that onboard faster. As you think about it, what it does is this system, as it gets a little bit better and a little bit better over time, it starts to take all that best knowledge and bring it to a place of being used. Now, why don't you just step out of the business and go ahead and systematize everything in one fell swoop? besides the fact that it would probably kill the production of your team or your business for you to step away for 2 months to create all your systems, generally speaking, if you want your systems to be used, you have to give your team a real activity, a real involvement, a real engagement with actually creating them. At the very least, letting them give you feedback on what's going on. So if you just step away from your business, what you're going to be left with is a policies and procedures manual, which no one will ever use. Certainly not past the point of hire. No one looks at the policies and procedures manual. How do I know this? Because I've worked with thousands of people at workshop that have bought franchises that have 500-600 page manuals that are policies and procedures manual, and the moment they get in the business, they're lost. The policies and procedures manual are dated the moment they're written down as a one-time occurrence. They're out of date. They haven't been kept current, and no one accesses it that way anymore. I mean, how many of you still go to the Encyclopedia Britannica when you have a question? No one does. Your grandparents don't even do that anymore, right? They pull out their cell phone, and Granny does what? She gets onto Google, and she searches for the answer. So which brings me to my second point. By creating your collection of systems, one of the most important places to think about is how do I help make it easy for people to find what they want? And it's the equivalent of how can you make sure you never lose your keys when you get home from work for the next day? How do you make sure you don't lose your keys? You put them in the same spot every single day. Now, we know this. Just like in your UBS, the equivalent is not that you put it in the same spot, it's that you name things consistent. That if you name things for how would somebody else search for this, then your UBS is easy to use. They'll find it, they'll use it, their improvements will go back into the system, making it better. If their improvements go back into the system, which makes it better, they're more likely to use it the second time. If they use it the second time, any improvements they make when they use it will go back into the system, which makes it more what? Makes it more valuable. Now that it's more valuable, the next person is more likely to what? To use it. Now that they use it, any improvements that they make go back, and you see where I'm heading with this. It becomes a virtuous cycle. If they don't find what they want, I mean, it used to be they would be willing to look for 5 minutes for the document. How many of you, if you don't find your document in your equivalent of your UBS in 2 minutes, you just say it just doesn't exist, right? You just recreate the thing from scratch. And you'll just have 2 now versions, and that UBS becomes less valuable because you have 2 systems in parallel. We want everything in one system going through. And to do that, we have to make it easy for people to find what we're looking for. So what does your UBS gives you? What it's really doing is it's giving you a way to talk about systems in your company. Hey, we're going to start with the HR function. Or hey, at your team, you're going to start by organizing, and your team might be responsible for the operations. So we're going to start here. What systems do we already have inside of operations? What 1 or 2 systems this quarter would be most valuable to build out this quarter? And start there. And every quarter we make it a little bit better, and a little bit better, and a little bit better. And within a very short time, what happens is not just you have the systems. The systems are valuable, but you want to know what's priceless? It's not the system. What's priceless is the culture of people creating, using, deleting, and pruning, and actually thinking in systems. That's what's valuable and priceless. And to do that, you need to kind of use this UBS concept over time. And after several years of doing this, it's like everyone knows. You just go to this spot, you pull out the most current version, and you don't have all these systems going on in parallel. The other parts of strategic depth have to do with training your team and cross-training them on different functions. I'll come back to Anne here right now. 4 months after that period, she came back to a company that had had its largest spurt of growth in her company history. She gets her business by doing what's called an RFP, responding to a request for a proposal. So a government agency or a social business will put out an RFP, request for proposal. She and her team put together the marketing plan of what they can do, a scope of work and a pricing. During the time that she was out, her team put together 20 RFP proposals. They responded to 20 RFPs. They got 19 of them, unheard of. They started those 19 engagements while she was laid up, and she couldn't do the work. If she had not, for the prior 6 months prior, started this work on systems, her team would have been flummoxed. The nice part is you do not need to systematize everything in your business. If you systematize everything in your business, you're going to overly constrain your people, and it's impossible to maintain. But if you can think about it, if you have a skeleton, a structure of how to do the core functions of your business, A reasonably well-trained, smart person can go in and now they can make the rest of that work. But if you take a reasonably smart person and throw them in the deep end with no support, no structure, your odds of them being successful are really low. But if you put them into a structure, a good person's going to get a great result with the structure. So we don't need everything to be systematized. We need the important, the highest value parts of the business to be systematized. And systematizing a business is a never-ending thing. You will never be done. It's not about being done. It's about having this be a living, breathing discipline, a cultural element for you over time as you do that. So I've got one more story here I want to share. This is Blake Schwank. Some of you know Blake. He's got an IT services company, since we were talking about that. 3 or 4 time recipient on the Inc. 5000. He's been a client for a number of years. Well, 3 years or 2 years into this process, his number 2 person quit. His name was Miguel. And Miguel knew how to do everything. And Blake shared with me, I remember standing in a parking lot after a keynote I had given. We were standing and talking in the parking lot in Colorado. He shared with me, he said, David, if this had happened 2 years ago, it would have taken me probably 3 or 4 months to recover. We would have lost key customer accounts. It would have cost us millions of dollars probably over the life of these customers. His comment was, it was stressful, but within 72 hours, all of his functions were handed off to other people who had already been in some respects cross-trained. All the systems for how to do the core parts of his function were there, and they covered it. It made such a difference. So I want to pause here for a moment. And so that was kind of the big picture of how we approach. I want to summarize what we've got here. So the first part is you make the decision that we're going to live and operate our business from which economy? The value economy. And that's not what you say, that's us watching what you do. If you're in the value economy, that means that not every hour is creating value. Instead, what we say is your best attention is going to your highest value creating activities. Most importantly, especially for you guys here, is how do you deal with your team? It's one thing if you live in the value economy, but which economy do you push your team to live in? And what do you reward with attention? What do you reward with promotion? What do you reward with compensation? Do you reward people who have a lot of hours, a lot of effort, great attitude, or people who have a reasonable attitude but create great results? Right? I'm hoping it's the latter. And yes, I'd love for them to have a great attitude too, but ultimately the result piece has to come higher than the time served because it's about the value created. Second step we said was you have to start with yourself and reclaim some of your best time to focus on your most important activities. We have to identify what do you do that creates the most value. Many of you already know what that is because you've already done your time value matrix. I'm going to do a checkup on you right now. Are you consistently taking that 2 or 3 hour focus block every single week? Show of hands for who takes at least one focus day, which means a 2 or 3 hour block of your best time going to your highest value activities consistently. Not every week, but consistently. Show of hands, right? So about 2/3 of the hands here. Fantastic. It makes a difference. Those who have kind of strayed, it's okay if you've strayed. This is our chance to kind of bring you back to the straight and narrow. You've strayed. This is like a revival, right? You can kind of say, I'm getting back on the horse. You can get your new coin if you can keep this going for just even another 90 days, right? I'm back on the value economy here. I've got my value coin. It's normal. You're going to stray. It's one of the nice things about getting together every quarter, because as you start to dip a little bit, we can come and kind of give it a little bit of a pickup. You have a big burst for a month or two, and as you start to decline, we can give you another burst. How many of you have discovered that? It's like hygiene. I get it. I'm the same way. Every quarter when we get together, it also gives me a real encouragement to do the steps because I don't want to be inconsistent or a hypocrite about what we're teaching. I want to do my best to do what we say we do, and knowing that I can't do it perfectly, I'll make plenty of mistakes along the way. So now that you're putting your best time in your highest value activities, we want to do the same thing with our company. And we talk about that as aligning our company by focusing on our fewer better. We say, what's my sweet spot? Every quarter, what's the number one limiting factor that constrains growth for my company, and how do I push that back? Put it through 2 filters, low-hanging fruit, home runs. Pick your 1 or 2 sweet spot ideas and focus on that. You're going to create an action plan every quarter, and nice thing is that on Sunday afternoon, all of you will build your action plan. Steve's going to walk you through it, how to build your action plan, and when you're done, you'll leave with a 1-page action plan. Wonderful. And then hopefully what you'll do is you'll put it in the coaching app so that your coach can see what you came up with, and she or he can give you feedback on it and work with you on that. How do you make sure you do your action plan? That's where big rocks come in. Every single week you stop and say, what can I get done this week for my action plan or for my great big, overwhelmingly, stupidly ridiculous to-do list? What would be the most important one or two things this week? I take it off the to-do list and put it into a separate spot called the Big Rock Report. Here's the 2 things this week. Everything else is gravy. Here's the 2 things that create the most value. And at the end of the week, I close the loop. Did I get them done? And of course, it asks you what were your victories, what challenges did you have, and if there's any other updates. But at heart, 70% of the value of a Big Rock Report is just identifying what 1 or 2 things should you pull from all those other spots to put them right here front and center. I do this and this, and these are my non-negotiables for the week, and everything else is gravy. The final piece of what we said is over time, as we do those first 3 things, over time we have to increase strategic depth in our companies, which means we need to build systems, we need to cross-train our team how to do different functions. And I've got one more assignment for you here that helps make sure you're actually building strategic depth. It's going to be painful. You're going to hate me for it. You're going to come by later on and you're going to kind of go, I can't believe you said that, David. I'm going to assign you as homework to take vacation. I know it's horrible. It's how awful. Why do we need to leave our business and take a vacation from our own company? 2 reasons. Number 1, you cast a very big shadow in your business. I bet if I were to follow you through your business, I would see a lot of people automatically deferring to you, not just because you're an authority figure, but because, quite frankly, you make their life easier. Well, if I can say, how do I do this? What do? You jump right in and you do it. How many of you rescue people at work, right? Let me handle it. How many of you take on monkeys, things to do that you should leave with somebody else? All of us do. Why? Because we're control freaks. In this room, I think we can honestly say that at least 85 to 90% of us love being in control. Who loves being in charge? Right? We say we don't, but how many people in here would say our behavior says we love being in charge? Or another way of framing it is, how many of you feel uncomfortable watching other people do something you know how to do better? Right? I mean, that's control freak. I am a huge control freak. I will be the first to admit it, as long as Heather's not in the room. She already knows this, but I pretend as if I'm not a control freak at home, and then she pretends like she actually almost believes it. It's a gracious thing. It's kept us together for 20 years. It works well. But where was I? I was somewhere. Vacation, thank you. I knew there was a point to that. So first thing it does is it helps give other people a forced chance to stand on their own. Right? Russell, I love what you're doing here. You're taking your sabbatical over the summer to work on your house, forces everybody else in your outdoor guiding service and outdoor activity company to step up. You're not there. They're going to have to be there to belay each other, so to speak. Second thing it does is it shows you the holes. When you come back from that 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 2 months or whatever it might be, you're going to ask 2 questions of everyone that is an important leader in the company. What worked well when I was gone? Where were the places that showed that things just worked smoothly, where we grew? Second question, what were the 1 or 2 or 3 places that next time we really need to improve, the places that we had some holes or gaps? In my next book that's coming out in September, I shared the story of R.C. Chavez, and R.C. has a really well-oiled machine that does remodels. He buys and resells about 100 houses a year in California. He's one of the largest rehabbers in his city in Sacramento. And Joe knows because he does some work for him consistently on some of his rental properties. He's got another part of his company. But he set a goal to take a 7-week vacation. And so when he came back from the prior year where he had done it, it didn't work so well. There were a lot of places where he still had to work. So we said, okay, what worked well? Well, this worked well and that worked well. Well, what would we need to do different this next period of time that would make this vacation even better? And so they did things like, well, let's schedule in 2 specific periods that I'll do a check-in. I'll get all my people on a call at these times. And if you have questions that are non-urgent, you can save it for these timed check-ins. That was one thing that they did. So I don't know what it is for you and whether you take a 7-day vacation. It can't just be a 7-hour vacation. That's just called night. That's not going to strengthen your business at all. But a 7-day, a week vacation, a 3-week vacation, usually it takes about a week before these glaring deficiencies really come true. Otherwise, well, we can wait until she comes back. We can wait until he gets here again. So give yourself that gift. And I would encourage you, rather than doing it for the first time all in one fell swoop, break it up, right? Give yourself to ease into it. I remember, Clayton, you and I had talked before. I said, Clayton, what if you had to take a vacation every quarter? because initially you weren't doing that, right? You were working a lot. And this idea that, hey, I'm going to force myself to take a vacation every quarter. Now, maybe it doesn't work like clockwork that way, and maybe the vacation includes in there that you can do a little bit of checking in from your RV, but it's that idea that if I force myself to step away, it's like with my kids. It lets them grow and do things. I know I'm not the only one. How many of you have been, like my 6-year-old knows how to play me like a piano. We're in a hurry to go somewhere. His shoes aren't tied. What does he do? I can't. Or how many of you had your kids go limp on you before? Right? And what do I do because I'm a weak, spineless sponge? What do? When I'm in a hurry, I just tie the darn shoelaces. Now, did that help in any real way? No. What I really need to do in those moments is to let him do that. Now, if I'm not there to tie his shoes, like at school, somehow he manages to do what? To tie his own shoelaces. We want to do the same thing, and I found for me, and this may or may not be true for you, that even though we know to do that in the workplace, it's still very difficult. Sometimes the easiest way to do that is to not be present for periods of time. I'm not saying be gone for a year, but go away for a week and a half and take a trip. 3 months later, go away for a 2-week trip. It really is a great way to grow the business beyond just you. So we're formally done tonight. We wanted to end at 8. We went over a little bit. We're just going to hang out socially, informally at the bar. We'd love for you to join us if you'd like to. Tomorrow morning, we start at 8:30 sharp. Come here a little bit early. And so for those of you who've been around the Maui community, a lot of what I shared here tonight was things that you've heard before, correct? But those, and hopefully that was a good checkup for you to make sure, am I doing versus just knowing? Because we don't know if we're not doing. For those of you that were new to the community, now you get a sense. That's how we approach scaling a company. Every quarter, we stop, step back, review the business. And then we plan for the coming quarter. We race ahead for 90 days, big rock reports, keeping you on track. At the end of the quarter, we regroup, we create our next quarterly plan. It is not the sexiest way of growing a business, but it just works. It's effective. If you were playing baseball, it would be the equivalent of a team that just gets singles and doubles, one after the other, after the other, after the other. And of course, if you consistently do that, what will happen at the end of the game? You're consistently going to win. So it might not be sexy, but it works. Have a great evening, and thank you for sharing tonight. Good.